Hello there everyone, it's me Harry, and this is day 2 of my Mediavent calendar. And this time round, for day 2, we're going to take a look at some Disney video games for the GameCube. Like, I could do all of my Disney games at once, but I think it would be a lot easier for me just to do them like by console or something, depending on how my mood is like. So, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I have put them all in their release date order. But some of them I don't really remember their release dates, so I'll just say their month instead. But yeah, we're going to start off with Donald Duck Quack Attack. So this got a port on the GameCube 1.5 years after the other versions, which were on every other platform imaginable, including the Nintendo 64 and the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2. This version of the game is based on the PlayStation 2 version, with some minor little differences, but nothing much to say that they're still both the same game. So this was released by Ubisoft, and it came out with the GameCube in Europe on May the 3rd, 2002. So the story in the game is that Donald Duck has to save Daisy from Murloc the Magician from DuckTales the movie. And levels are mostly combined either in 2D or 3D style, and it uses the soundtrack from the PS1 version. But, as I said, each version is its own game, so the first version of the game is the Nintendo 64-PC-Dreamcast version. The second version is the PS1 version, which has 2D and 3D levels combined most of the time, and then this version of the game, the PS2-GameCube version, has 2D and 3D levels separate, and then there's also like new worlds and bosses and whatnot, and 14 extra moves for Donald to do. It's still kind of interesting that Ubisoft ported this to the GameCube a long while after. The back of the manual has an ad for Disney's Tarzan Free Ride, which came out on the same day as well, and speaking of that game, that's exactly what I have next. Disney's Tarzan Free Ride, a port of the PlayStation 2 game of the same name. I don't know where this takes place in the Tarzan universe, Disney Tarzan continuity, but I do believe it may have taken place after the events of the first film. So here's the blurb. It's an okay game, but nothing really much to say. It's also from Ubisoft as well. And one thing I did forget to mention is that both Quack Attack and Free Ride were both developed by Ubisoft Montreal. Or well, for Quack Attack, just the PS2 and GameCube versions. Each of the different versions I mentioned have different developers behind them. Next up is Disney's Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse, a point-and-click adventure game. Published by Nintendo, developed by Capcom. This was released on the same day as one of the Game Boy Advance games that was a port of a Super Nintendo title. I've forgotten what it was called. But essentially, this game is obviously made for very young children. It lacks challenge, and sometimes it just feels a bit clunky. Yeah, Disney's Magical Quest, yeah. And then if you connect them together, it gives you some extra content, which you can unlock in the game itself, but it's like a paywall of sorts, an early kind. So as this is published by Nintendo, it's got Nintendo information on the back. And there's a Nintendo VIP 24/7 card, which was the predecessor to Club Nintendo. And there's an ad for other GameCube games. So yeah, as I said, this is a semi-first party title, as Nintendo co-owns the copyright of this game, but its sequel, Hide and Sneak, was entirely published and developed by Capcom. Nintendo didn't have anything involved in its development or publication. But still, but that was because, at the time, Nintendo had exclusive licensing rights to publish Mickey Mouse video games. That's how Mickey Speedway USA and whatnot came to be. Disney's Donald Duck PK. Paper Nick, or whatever PK stands for. I think I just said the Italian name of Donald Duck instead, but its US name is Disney's PK Out of the Shadows. So this was developed by a Ubisoft studio. I don't know which one it was. I think it was the same one who did the original Quack Attack. And published by Ubisoft, obviously. And it's nothing much to say about this one. It's just a very bland platforming game. At least the artwork is pretty cool, considering that PK was originally a comic book series anyway. And I think this may have been like the last game that was released as part of Ubisoft's deal with Disney Interactive in regards to Donald Duck. Disney Sports Football. So this was part of a lineup of Disney games where Mickey Mouse and his friends were playing different sports. They were all GameCube or Game Boy Advance titles, and they were all published and developed by Konami. So this was one of them, where they were all playing professional football. In the US, the game was called Disney Sports Soccer. There was another game called Disney Sports Football that wasn't released in Europe because it was American football. And it wouldn't have sold well for that way. There we are. I'm not a big fan of professional football, so this one isn't really that interesting to me. One that could have been more interesting is Disney Sports Skateboarding, also by Konami, as I said before. But it's not. It's just a very, very bland Tony Hawk's Pro Skater kind of game, and Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure completely overwhelms this one to a tick. And that game had Disney movie licenses in it rather than Mickey Mouse and his friends, most likely because of this game. Here's a title that's gotten pretty rare since last year after it became viral on Twitter, but I got this pretty cheap. Piglet's Big Game. So this is the video game adaptation of Piglet's Big Movie, but it does not share the same storyline as the film. So this was developed by Doki Denki Studio, which developed other Winnie the Pooh titles. They also did Tigger's Honey Hunt and Pooh's Party Game in Search of the Treasure, or Party Time with Winnie the Pooh. And is published by Gotham Games, which was a short-lived publishing label of Take-Two Interactive. The label was ceased by the company afterward, merged with Global Star Software. There was a PC version of this game, but it's a completely different title to this. It doesn't have any connections with this game at all. Because in this, Piglet has to try and scare Huffalumps whilst entering dream worlds. And its successor is Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly Adventure from April of 2005, which was developed by Phoenix Studio, which was formed up by some employees of Doki Denki when it closed down. But this time it's published by Ubisoft. And I say the game is a successor because it uses much of the same engine and much of the same gameplay. And I think it uses much of the same models as well. So while it did come out the same time as Pooh's Huffalump movie, it doesn't have any connection with the film. And it's more or less like a my first video game kind of thing, because it also has a mode where you can just explore around. That mode's meant for like very, very young children who are just learning how to play video games. So it's sort of like that kind of thing, but yeah. And while all these games were Disney games that were published by other companies, they normally just licensed off their IPs to other companies. Disney started publishing their own titles around 2005 when they rebranded Disney Interactive as Buena Vista Games. And so, some of their titles were, well, what you'd expect. So, the first two that were released under the banner were Chicken Little, and The Chronicles of Narnia. And I'll talk about them both. So Chicken Little is obviously based on the Disney film of the same name, and it shares much of the plot from the film. And it was released. Its release schedule depended on the region because since it tied in with the theatrical release of the film, it came out in different areas. So, in France, it came out in November of 2005, but in the UK, it came out in February of 2006 on all platforms. So yeah. And it was developed by Avalanche Software, who at that point Buena Vista Games had acquired and merged into when they started buying out several developers. So it did really show, Disney were trying to really get into the first-party video game market, which they started experimenting with for the Game Boy Advance. And then after a while, they started republishing certain games in Europe under their own banner. And then they started publishing some new games altogether. Now, here comes The Chronicles of Narnia. This has a very interesting release. So, the game came out in November of 2005. But for consoles, that was only for the PlayStation 2 version because Disney and Sony signed a deal that would allow the PlayStation 2 version to have a console exclusivity date up until the end of March 2006. And that must have worked out well because the game is actually very common. And since the movie was very popular, and of course this game came in PlayStation 2 bundles, it made sense. Whilst the GameCube version and the Xbox version didn't come out until the end of March 2006, around the time the DVD of the film came out. So these versions aren't as common. But I am lucky to own both of these. And this was developed by Traveller's Tales. This was right after they started releasing Lego video games. So this was one of the last titles they did that wasn't a Lego title, prior to Warner Brothers buying them out. But still, a fun game regardless. And it does actually share some similarities with their Lego titles, but in some way it doesn't, if you get what I mean. Anyways, that's the end of day 2. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you get to enjoy day 3 next time. See you later, everyone. Bye-bye.